Right, how are we doing, everyone? This I think should be an interesting video, and a video I wanted to do. There's only so far that my knowledge of Dubai and the concept of state ownership goes, and that's why, thankfully, Nicholas has agreed to talk to me. Me and Nick, I think, spoke a few years ago, back when it was Saudi Arabia were linked with Manchester United. I remember us having conversations about it at that point. But the purpose of this conversation here today, it's just going to be just a casual chat between me and Nick to try and offer you a bit of insight into Dubai. Why would they want to buy Manchester United? What are their intentions? Is it fair to label all concepts of Middle Eastern states owning football clubs as bad? Is there any differences between the two? And also, what the difference between UAE is and Dubai, because they're kind of all one of the same, but they're all part of it. But Nick, thank you very much for your time today, mate.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me.
What is it? If you want to introduce yourself, what is it that you do in your job and in your sphere?
So I'm the director of an organisation called Fairsquare, which is like a human rights NGO. We do a lot of work on migrant workers' rights, among other things. And I guess part of the relevance to this debate is I got interested in that when I lived in the UAE between 2002 and 2006, not in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi actually. But yeah, my interest in the region and the issues comes from there.
Well, I didn't actually know you lived there. Was it nice?
Yeah. Not for me.
No, not for you. I don't think it would be for me either. It's good for a lot of people. But that aside, Dubai, what can you tell us? Obviously, we know why Qatar have bought PSG. We know why Saudi Arabia have bought Newcastle. We know why Abu Dhabi, I believe, bought Man City. Would you expect the exact same purpose and reason to be why the idea could be entertained for Dubai to buy Manchester United?
Yes and no, I think. I mean, Dubai's slightly different, right? I mean, you have to understand what the UAE is, right? The UAE is 7 semi-autonomous emirates, right? Dubai is one, Abu Dhabi is another. They're the 2 most powerful ones. Abu Dhabi is by far the most powerful one, and it has all the oil. Dubai is second in line, if you will. Doesn't have a lot of oil, right? Which is why in the 2000s, the first place in the Gulf region that started to become very known, and very well publicized, people were going there on holiday and such, was Dubai. And the reason for that was that Dubai doesn't have oil, and Dubai had an eye on what they were going to do when the oil ran out. So Dubai created, in ways of very ambitious project to turn this little emirate into a sort of global hub for tourism, for sport, for all sorts of things. Emirates Airlines, for example, it's now a regional hub for airlines. A lot of people fly through Dubai. And Dubai has always been in the spotlight, right? Dubai is a place that everybody knows already. It's not like they're trying to put themselves on the map here, because they're already on the map. Also, sports washing, this argument about are they trying to deflect attention away from their human rights abuses? Well, not really, because Dubai's never had a whole lot of criticism for its human rights abuses. I suspect, and again, I don't know too much about the deal, and you need to caveat all my comments with that.
Yeah.
But I suspect that what Dubai like about Manchester United is the brand, right? Manchester United has... I mean, what is it? The biggest brand in world football, if not the biggest, then the second biggest. It's up there, right? Exactly. Okay. Now that will be very appealing to Dubai, I think. An emirate which understands really the primacy of image and marketing. I think a tie-in with Manchester United would just bring obvious commercial benefits, obvious reputational benefits to Dubai. That other clubs won't. So in a sense, I think it's a little bit about that. That's my hunch. That's just my hunch.
So yeah, Dubai itself, as far as I can see it from the outside looking in, like it's tourism has been a massive part of Dubai, right? There's a massive expat community from a lot of countries there. There's not a lot of people that I know that have gone to live there, but there's far more people that I know have gone to Dubai and gone on holiday to Dubai and lived and worked in Dubai than any other sort of region around there.
Right.
Would you say it's kind of individual inside the Emirates? It's got its own unique way of working.
It does, yeah, and it always has done. For example, there's a lot of just to give you one example, there's a lot of antipathy in the Gulf region towards Iran, right? They tend not to like Iran. Dubai, which is a creek, a sort of small river going into where boats can port, has always had a very strong trading relationship with Iran, right? So that's just one instance of where all these individual emirates, they are beholden to Abu Dhabi, right? But Abu Dhabi has all the power ultimately. But they do tread their own path in certain areas, right? So Dubai's decision to diversify its economy into tourism, that was its own decision. Abu Dhabi came along a lot later. What you're seeing now in Saudi Arabia when they're trying to do it, that's very much copying the Dubai playbook. So yeah, they are in many respects a different, it has a different character, has a different feel to it. It is in many respects more progressive and more open than other parts of the Gulf. It always has been. It attracts a very cosmopolitan crowd. All sorts of people base themselves in Dubai. It's known also as a haven for criminals, frankly, and money laundering. The boxing promoter, the Irish boxing promoter, for example, Daniel Kinahan, is based in Dubai, and all sorts of Russians and Indian figures from the underworld are also based there. So it's it is a very particular place, not just within the UAE, but within the Gulf.
And something you mentioned earlier there, you're saying that majority of the wealth from Dubai is not oil based. Is that where is the so obviously you can look at Saudi Arabia and you can look at what they've done with Newcastle, or Qatar with PSG, and Abu Dhabi with City, and this concept of state wealth, it's oil money, it's blood money, that's where it's come from. Again, would you say that Dubai doesn't fit in? It would be unfair to tar everyone with the same brush.
Well, it's different. Like, you're right. They have some oil, they have some natural gas, but not a whole lot. Nothing compared to Abu Dhabi. So they make their money from a lot of money from tourism, a lot of money from real estate, a lot of money from outward investment. They have all sorts of corporations have set up there. They have free trade zones and such. So they have, I think, quite adeptly diversified their economy away from oil. The extent to which it's sustainable, I wouldn't know. You need to speak to a real expert to get the lowdown on the finances. It is slightly different. It's not quite the same. I would say that broadly speaking, the motivations for buying a club aren't a million miles away from the other ones, and the business model of Dubai isn't a million miles different from the business model of Saudi Arabia or Qatar. There are differences for sure. I would have the same problem personally with Dubai buying a football club as I would with any state buying a football club. They're not a state; they're a sort of semi-autonomous emirate within a state. Personally, for me, no. It would obviously be an absolute no, not just for all sorts of reasons, not least its human rights record and the inherent problems of that. But yeah, again, just going back to the main point, it's slightly different for sure.
It's kind of not doubling down, but sort of sticking on that point there. If there are, and they are out there are a lot of concerned United fans about the fact that if Dubai, or whether it's private Saudi investors, were to take over the club, it would sort of rip a bit of the foundations and the culture of what Manchester United has been built up on. What would you say are the fair points for concern? What would you say the biggest things about Dubai taking over Manchester? If you were a United fan, what would be the biggest things that would worry you about that?
Well, I think there's two things to worry about, right? And you can worry about both of them or one of them or neither of them, right? One's the sustainability point, right? Everyone looks at Newcastle and everyone looks at City and thinks, well, that's amazing. This is tremendous. We've got all this money and look at the success it's brought us. The problem is that the ownership of those clubs is subject to geopolitics, right? And geopolitical whims. Both of those clubs could disappear, frankly, because that money can disappear in an instance because of some sort of change in the geopolitical makeup of the world, right? If Mohammed bin Salman loses power in Saudi Arabia, what happens to Newcastle United? Will they keep the club, or will all that money go and all those players go? Same goes for Manchester City. Or if they just lose interest in it, if they decide that owning a football club He's not worth the cost anymore. Look what's happened at the Qatar World Cup, what's happening right now in terms of how its reputation is being trashed. Is there going to become a tipping point at which they just aren't interested anymore? It's possible. And then what happens to the club? So you're going to get this success, but on the other hand, is it sustainable? So that would be one concern I have. It's not that these clubs are bringing success. It's that these clubs are fundamentally, in my view, destabilizing influences, potentially destabilizing influences. So it's an existential issue for the club. The second one is what does it mean for the reputation of the club and so on and so forth. Now, Dubai, the UAE has a horrendous human rights record. I mean, it's just awful. I mean, take everything that happens in Qatar, right, and add in the sort of the torture and disappearance of dissidents, right? Add in that really horrendous element to it. I mean, it is a place that I am banned from. I'm not allowed to go into the country. I'm not alone in that. Many sort of activists and journalists and academics just can't go there. We're blacklisted because of the work we do. It is, it is a place where it's a surveillance state. It's a police state. It's a state where migrant workers are treated abysmally. And the thing I always say to football clubs is like, do you really want your club to be associated with that? Do you really want to have battles about disappearance of dissidents, the enslavement of migrant workers, the repression of women? Is that really something that you want going on in your life and that you want in your club? I understand that the pushback to that is, well, everyone's like that now, so why can't we join on the bandwagon? I get that. I guess my point is, don't join the bandwagon. Join the opposition to that, because we need to get states out of football. We need to get the Gulf states out of football. And if they take over Manchester United, that job becomes a lot more difficult.
Do you think that's even possible now? Do you think that obviously it started with City, and I think Qatar was 2011. Obviously Newcastle's happened last year. We don't know whether it's going to be United. But with United, it's with the figures being banded around the club, you're looking. I mean, there's kind of guesswork at this moment in time, but it's the sale of United will go for somewhere in the region of 4.5 billion to probably 6. Thereabouts. It will become the most expensive sports franchise ever sold, and there's very finite amount of people that can actually do that. Which is my gut instinct is, and that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because I really need to get my head, because my gut instinct is that we're heading towards there, simply because of the amount of money involved.
Yeah, I know. I agree with you. I agree with you. The trend is that the only people who can now buy these clubs are states. Because they don't need to make a return on the investment, right? The investment is the marketing. That's where it's an indirect return they get on it. And yeah, that's the way the game is going. I totally agree with you. And I understand why people are throwing their hands up and going, well, what else? I think I completely get that. But that is why I think there needs to be concerted opposition to that. Like we need to have a serious debate about the game and how the game is governed and how the game is funded, and that includes ownership. And until we start having that debate, and that means government involvement, right? This can't be supporters driving this. Supporters can be amazing allies in this and can refuse to accept these things, but it has to be governments and it has to be regulators saying, no, we're not allowing this. From my perspective, as I said earlier, I think this would be a disaster for Manchester United. From my perspective, I also, by the way, I'm not sure how on earth the Premier League can pass it. I mean, I'm not sure in what world it would be okay to have two teams from the United Arab Emirates, not just competing in the same league, but competing in the same city. The politics of that is.
So you say they have like semi-autonomy, but is there still like they kind of semi-work together at the same time?
Yeah, I mean,
well,
Mohammed bin Zayed is a dictator essentially, right? And there's a little mini dictator in Dubai called Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum. Mohammed bin Zayed has a lot of control and power over him. I mean, I'll give you an example. The Burj Khalifa, the tallest. Yeah. Well, it was initially meant to be called the Burj Dubai, but in 2008, Dubai had a financial crisis. Now this was like this building was going to be the epitome of Dubai. It was going to be something that they showed all around the world, saying, "Look at us, biggest building in the world." And Abu Dhabi came in and rescued the project. Yeah, and they said, "We'll bail you out, but one of the conditions is you're not naming it the Burj Dubai anymore. You're naming it after the Burj Khalifa. That's our guy, the Abu Dhabi president. So that's why it's called the Burj Khalifa. So it gives you an idea what the dynamics are, right? You know, I mean, I don't think that it should be possible to have Newcastle and City in the same league, given how close Saudi Arabia and the UAE are as allies. But to have the sort of president of the UAE owning Manchester City and the prime minister of the UAE owning Manchester United, I mean, that just seems...
Well, going a little bit step further than that, I can't remember his name, the sports minister from Saudi Arabia was interviewed yesterday by BBC and Sky, suggesting that the Saudi government would back private investors to buy Manchester United, aka Saudi Arabia would effectively have control and ownership of that, and therefore control and own Newcastle and Manchester United, which is ridiculous. That's an impossible conflict of interest, isn't it?
Absolutely, impossible. And remember, I don't know if you're aware of this, but one of the ways that Mohammed bin Salman came to power and centralized power in Saudi Arabia was that shortly after he came to power, he gathered together like the most powerful businessmen in the country, imprisoned them in the Ritz-Carlton in Riyadh, and basically tortured some of them and did a complete shakedown, stole all their assets, took all their money, took a lot of their power, right? So the business elite in Saudi Arabia are petrified of Mohammed bin Salman, who wields incredible power over all of them. So any private entity in Saudi Arabia that takes control of any club remains under the effective control of the owner of Newcastle United.
Wow.
It's a lot to chew on.
No, it's just the fact that I can't really, unless somebody comes out with maybe a US equity firm that's sort of consortium made up of like 4, 5, 6 owners that can put that sort of money together. And considering the Glazers are American and we're using an American bank, there is a possibility of this happening. But as it stands, I just can't see how anybody can financially compete with Dubai if they want to come in and do it. And that's kind of why I want to have this conversation and allow this conversation to go to other United fans, because I think it's sort of a quandary that we're trying to get our heads around, and it's kind of hard.
Yeah, no, I get that. There aren't many sort of pleasing options available, right? I get it, and I get why Dubai would seem as A, they can afford us, B, are they quite as bad as the others, and C, you know, is it slightly different model that's or a slightly different rationale for the ownership? I could understand why you'd want to have those discussions and talk about that. It's I would say it's generally no less problematic than the other ones, with some slight differences. But that doesn't get you around the who else question.
In terms of what else Dubai, obviously we're talking about tourism as a big part of their industry. Saudi Arabia have their 2030 vision, which is sort of a big part of moving their economy away from just relying on oil. Is there something that Dubai is doing that's sort of similar to that? Maybe not in name, but would that be a reason as to why Manchester United again would be such a good idea for them?
I don't think so. I'm not sure if they have a document like that. Abu Dhabi has a document like that. I think Dubai probably got way ahead of the curve, and if they had a document like that, it was published years and years ago. I mean, a quick Google search will probably tell us. But no, it doesn't quite fit the model, because remember, Dubai was way ahead of all of these states. The reason no one blinks an eye when Dubai is holding sports events is that via sport and via tourism and such, its reputation has become entirely normalized. Right? If Dubai was to hold the World Cup, I mean, it probably would get a lot of criticism, but it would probably get less than Qatar, right? Because it's already done the hard yards of normalizing its relationship in the West. The West sees Dubai as a fairly liberal and tolerant and progressive place. I mean, it's the #1 winter destination for British tourists and holidays. I
mean, that's in terms of the 7 regions there, it is the most progressive, right?
Well, yes and no. It's a place where it attracts a more cosmopolitan crowd, I would say. You know, it is, in terms of the laws and such, I mean, you can get into the same trouble in Dubai as you will in Abu Dhabi. They haven't set the same, authoritarian agenda is Abu Dhabi, right? Domestic policy is essentially set by Abu Dhabi. So if you want to look at who's responsible for the dark turn that the UAE took around 2012, that's Mohammed bin Zayed. That's Abu Dhabi, yeah? But those laws are still in force in Dubai because they are ultimately in control of Dubai. So it's it's not a I wouldn't look for silver linings necessarily.
I'm you know what? I probably fucking am. I'll be honest. I probably am. Like subconsciously, I don't mean to be, but I probably am because they're just at this moment in time, I just can't see another way out for United fans. And if
I mean, another just to further darken your mood on this.
Oh, thank you very much, mate.
I mean, a couple of years ago, Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum kidnapped his own daughter.
Yeah.
Princess Latifa, who tried to escape from the country on a yacht, using a French submariner who was friends with her gym instructor. I mean, it sounds like a ridiculous tale, but it actually happened. And he basically got in touch with Indian special forces who had her kidnapped off the Indian coast, taken her back home, and nothing's been seen of her since, really. And that's the second daughter he's been accused of kidnapping.
And didn't his wife escape to the UK?
His wife escaped to the UK and won a court case against him because she was terrified of him and said that he'd threatened to kill her and such. He was also accused of, in 2000 and the early 2000s, I can't remember the precise dates, of a lawsuit accusing him of child slavery, which was filed in Miami and Kentucky. Now he managed to get out of that one because of political manoeuvring, but there wasn't much of a substantive defense to the actual allegations. So he's I mean, to say he's problematic isn't really getting to just what a character he is.
What would you expect to happen? I'd say, like, the Glazers they released a statement on Tuesday saying that they're looking for quote unquote strategic investment opportunities, I think they called it. If Dubai came forward, would you imagine it would probably move quickly from a political point of view? Is it something that would have to be going through a lot of hurdles? I mean, how does it even work?
Well, again, I'm really not the expert on that.
Yeah,
I can point to the Newcastle instance. That was quite interesting. I mean, the problem that Saudi had in buying Newcastle appeared to be the pirating of TV rights. That seemed to be the sticking block. And once the Premier League was satisfied that wasn't a problem, they waved them through. The Premier League seemed to be a lot less concerned about the actual owners and directors test than people stealing their money. So look at what happened in terms of the British government weighing in support of the Saudi bid. I don't think there's any doubt that Boris Johnson and others within the government wanted to get that through because we sell them loads of weapons, essentially, and we like doing trade with them. I would not be surprised if similar pressure was brought to bear. In this case, I wouldn't be surprised if Mohammed bin Zayed in Abu Dhabi was keen to see this go through and put a ton of pressure on the British government to make it go through. I don't think the Premier League is is an organisation that looks robust in terms of being able to put up opposition to it. And of course, who now sits in the Premier League? Well, Mohammed bin Salman and Mohammed bin Zayed, they own two of the clubs. So the Gulf states are gaining more and more power within the league itself and have a lot of influence over the British government. So my sense of it is that if Dubai really wanted it, it would be very hard to stop.
Honestly, that's my sense too, which is kind of why I wanted to speak to you. And I mean, United have been stung from. Look, there's good owners in football, there's bad owners in football, then there's fucking bad owners in football, and that's the kind of conversation we're having here. Like, the Glazers were bad owners, but they weren't human rights abusers.
Well,
sorry, I was just going to say that we've been stung by American owners before, and that kind of scares United fans a little bit about the concept of going back to America for an American consortium of 4 or 5 businessmen. You think, well, this is the same rodeo, isn't it? So that's kind of why we're talking about Dubai. And I don't know.
I get that. It's similar to Newcastle, right? It's very similar to Newcastle. You have a club, a fan base that is furious about the way the club has been misgoverned, furious about the disrespect towards the club by these owners, and there's anger, and there's this very understandable desire to get a better ownership model and to get one that makes people happy about the club again, because it's so important to people. I completely understand that. it makes a lot of sense, you know.
Yeah, but then that's the problem. It's the but, and I think
There's
it's just that if you were to compare my feelings now in 2022 to 2009 when City were taken over by Abu Dhabi, and the disdain that United fans had towards the concept of oil money and that coming in, one thing we all have to admit is that in those 13 years, football really has just, they were the sort of the trendsetters there, and football really has just headed in that direction like a fast train, and it's just getting faster and faster and more expensive to get on that train. And
Right.
and if it's not a Gulf state, then it's, or you know, not technically a state, whatever you want to call it, then it's going to have to be set, because it's exactly what you said there. I mean, if Dubai bought United, they wouldn't really care about profit. That's not where the success is for them. And it's very, very difficult to find that sort of businessman away from the Gulf state.
Yeah, because because it's like the transfer market, right? They bought Qatar bought Neymar, right, for this unbelievable price, right? And suddenly they completely inflated the transfer market for everything. And suddenly, how many clubs can afford the top players now? So that was them, right? And this is happening again with the value of clubs, I would say. Although the Todd Boehly thing is, I mean, you could argue it was Todd Boehly's 2.5 billion, which did that as well. But yeah, we've created a situation, or rather we've allowed a situation to happen whereby only these types of people can own clubs. And that's a government issue, right? And that's why, I mean, I get your analogy about getting on the train, you know, and we need to get on the train. I mean, my thing is, well, we need to like stop the train or blow up the tracks or change trains, you know. Something like that.
Ah, shit. I think you can understand or maybe you can feel I think I'm representative of probably a mindset that a lot of United fans are going through right now. It's like, what can we do that isn't that, but still take us back to where we want to be at the top?
In terms of ownership, or in terms of what do you do? What do you do?
In terms of ownership, getting us there, because owners are the enablers. Owners, the right owners allow you to get back to that top table, and we haven't dined there for like 12, 13 years now.
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy in the kind of, there's no short answer to it, right? There's no quick fix to it, I don't think. I mean, the long answer is, I think fans need to start mobilizing for fan ownership or part ownership of clubs. We need to move to a 50+1 thing like they have in Germany. That's the kind of thing that actually would protect the clubs themselves in the game. I think we're a very long way away from that. But that's, I think, what people need to work towards.
Well, United fans we've already been protesting about that. We've already had our banners out about 50+1. We've been pushing for fan ownership inside the club for a long time. We've been promised a fan share scheme about 18 months ago. That's fucking come nowhere. It's because the Glazers just lied to us.
Yeah.
And again, you're looking at like a financial perspective, like, Jesus, you know how much money we'd need to raise as a fan base to be able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, there are answers like MPs, right? I mean, write your MPs and demand 50+1. Look what happened when all the fans in Newcastle wrote to their MPs and demanded that the Premier League push the sale through, or they said they were worried about transparency. I think something like 80 MPs wrote to them. Now, who asked them to do that? Well, it was Amanda Staveley of the bid. She understood what fans could do if they used the democratic mechanisms available to them. And that was a really impressive thing. And she actually, in a very Machiavellian and sinister way, managed to get her bid through, partly because of her use of the UK democratic system. That's one way to do it. I mean, I'm not suggesting that if everyone just sits down right now and writes to their MP and says, I want 50+1, that's going to happen. But fans, I think, part of the reason these guys love football is because they know the fan base comes with it, and they understand the influence, the collective influence that fan bases have, and the collective power that fan bases have. What happens then when they're bought over is that often fans throw up their hands and go, we can't do anything. We're completely powerless. It's not true. You know, individually fans are powerless, but collectively they're actually very influential and very powerful, or more influential and more powerful than they think they are. Let me be more precise about that. So
I feel better after talking to you somewhat, but not particularly. Because but it's just I think it's just the way that modern football's gone, and it just feels like United are the latest story and the latest example of something where it was better back in our day, sort of. And that's kind of what it feels like. We're losing grip of something that no matter how many people try and grab onto it,
Right.
We can't stop it from heading in that direction.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, one thing I will say is in this whole Qatar debate, right, which has been quite exhausting and quite depressing at times. One of the bright spots for me has been the way that the Bayern Munich fans have behaved and have sort of. I mean, like every time you see those guys and like young guys in their 20s, the ultras, you know, and a small section of the ultras, not even the big ultra groups, a smaller one. But the way that they've conducted themselves and the way that they've rallied around that issue without ever stopping supporting their club, right? They've been ardent supporters of their club and ardent opponents of the way that the club is run and who runs it, you know, and how they've run it. And Qatar's just a sponsor there, so it's slightly different. So there are things that fans can do, and there are bright spots in the game. And the bright spots in the game don't come from governors or regulators or sponsors or football associations or owners. It comes from fans, and that for me remains a bright spot. So if there's I'm just chucking in some.
We're ending on this note. There's no way we're talking after this. We're ending on a positive there. No, you're right there. What Bayern Munich fans have done. That I remember that when they stormed the AGM. I can't remember what. I think that was about Qatar actually.
Yeah.
I think it was it Uli Hoeneß when they were trying to get him to answer the questions about it.
I think so. Yeah.
I think it was. Yeah. I've got a lot of admiration for what Bayern fans do. But look, Nick, right? Thanks very much for your time today. Thanks very much for sort of, I suppose, helping United fans understand what Dubai is rather than just this, you know, place over there in the UAE, you know, what the governance of it is, why they might do it, the ins and the outs, and the things that I suppose all of us fans have got to weigh up into who we give our support to for the owners. Because there will, I imagine there'll be protests. If it gets to the point where Dubai might be taking over Manchester United, I'd be extremely surprised if there weren't protests. So I imagine this story's got a lot further to run. But Nick, mate, thanks very much for your time today. And by the way, I just want to mention, Nick was like, I was like, how have you been, Nick? And he goes, I'm good. I'm like, where are you living these days? He goes, I'm living in France. And I'm like, you don't happen to be living in Nice, do you? Like, yeah, I do actually. We just had a little conversation about Jim Ratcliffe off camera first.
Doesn't do my reputation as a human rights activist much good when people know that I live in Nice.
I've ruined it all now.
It's done now.
Nick, I appreciate it. I'll cut that bit out. Don't worry about it. But look, look, if I need to lean on you again in the future, I'll drop you a message. But I hope you're doing well, mate. I appreciate it.
No worries. Good to chat to you.